which is at 2 o'clock. It's by Professor Saeed Widros in the club room, and it promises to be wonderful because he's opening up new ways of looking at the partition. And this is actually going to talk about how our minds have been partitioned.
It looks like we have according to the schedule, we are missing the first presenter, but hopefully she'll be here. And as you all can see that this is the second day of the Memoryscape, and today morning session is titled Reimagining Partition through Visual and Audio Media. And when we say this, of course, the 3 papers which are here. The Nidhi's paper was looking at the novel, but the other 2 papers are directly, responding to the title of this panel, which is Mowtushi is talking about the radio broadcasting and the soundscape of it. She will be presenting after Israt Tejan. And the first presentation that we'll be hearing is titled Teaching Visual Media Texts in Partition Studies, a Praxis to Educate Amnesia on the study of 1947 partition in Bangladesh. And as maybe you can read the abstract as well, she has actually dealt with the syllabi, and in this process, how she has engaged with the visual materials. And this is as not only the pedagogical but also a methodological journey for the partition studies, dealt with a lot of interesting works that maybe many of you have dealt with differently. But when I was reading, and then I felt that this is a very interesting journey, that how you create a different approach towards not only the teaching and pedagogy but also researching the partition. So hopefully we will have a lot of question and answer. We'll keep all these things. I would want you to take notes so that we can have the question and answer and have a wonderful discussion at the end. So the floor is yours. For 15 minutes we'll try to hear. If it goes beyond, then I'll remind you. Israt.
Thank you for the wonderful beginning, and I hope I can keep up to your expectation. Good morning to everyone for coming. So the title of today's talk is Teaching Visual Media Texts in Partition Studies, a Praxis to Eradicate Amnesia on the study of the 1947 partition in Bangladesh. So I begin with the memory study that is done by Viet Thanh Nguyen. He writes about the significance of just memory and just forgetting and the negative consequences of the opposites in Nothing Ever Dies, Vietnam and the Memory of War. He has interpreted Paul Roker's ideas on memory and has given his own idea on ethical memory. Thanh says, quote, "We must remember in order to live, but we must also forget. Too much remembering and too much forgetting are both fatal, certainly to ourselves, perhaps to others. This is why demands to always remember and never forget eventually face calls to reconcile and forgive." Next slide. Thank you. The cycle works in reverse as well when we respond to amnesia by calling for history. But when can we forget? Well, as we respond to amnesia, so as Paul Ricoeur argues, there are unjust and just ways of forgetting, as there are unjust and just ways of remembering. Unjust ways of forgetting are much more common than just ones. They involve leaving behind a past that we have not dealt with in adequate ways. We ignore that past, we pretend it did not exist, or we write its history to serve a prejudicial agenda. Sometimes we conduct these actions under the guise of reconciliation, as when former enemies agree on treaties that allow them to be friends without addressing the history of violence that binds them. Part of this unjust forgetting is amnesia, which is one of the chief concerning areas that this workshop tends to address. Kavita Daya refers to the wound of partition as a consequence of an unfinished past, and Urvashi Bhutelia describes it as the business of living with the consequences of that history. Anam Zakaria in 1971, she is a third-generation historian from Pakistan. In 1971, A People's History from Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India offers a critical perspective on the disparity in memory regarding partition's impact on the subcontinent. Quote, while Pakistan saw 1947 as a triumph, making the birth of a new nation, in India, the memory of partition evoked a sense of loss, of the breakup of the motherland. Bangladesh, trapped between these two sentiments of gaining and losing, finds itself in a situation where it finds the legacy of partition interrupting its stability. Due to the language movement in 1952, several riots in the 60s, Liberation War in 1971, it hardly had any tranquil period to focus on the partition as a key historical event in the formation of its identity. Partition has become a signifier whose ongoing play never comes to rest, just the way Derridian term difference indicates the absence of transcendental signifiant. It turns to refugees, migration, border killing, stranded Pakistanis, river water distribution, natural disasters, and many more. Partition and Practice of Memory, edited by Churnjit Mam and Anne Murphy, includes a number of chapters on the practice of keeping partition memory alive by focusing on many various genres, such as stories, music, literary texts, etc., indicating films' contribution in shaping the popular mindset of people. Geeta Viswanathan and Salma Malik, in revisiting 1947 through popular cinema, a comparative study of India and Pakistan, appreciates the genre of leaving an everlasting impression in shaping the popular mindset of the people of India and Pakistan. They note that separated lovers, feuding families, and the trope of brothers lost in a mela or well-known lost and found theme are recurring themes of partition films in the subcontinent. They further note that the film industries of both India and Pakistan are replete with people, actors, producers, directors, scriptwriters, and technicians who are partition victims. However, they lament that, except for Ritik Ghatak's films and a Bangladeshi film called Chitra Nadir Pare by Tanvir Mukammal, the partition of the eastern borders of India, that is Bengal, was not highlighted. According to a Pakistani film analyst, Omar Adil, as mentioned in revisiting 1947 through popular cinema, a comparative study of India and Pakistan, quote, this lack of cinematic coverage of the partition of Bengal largely was due to the fact that mainstream movie makers were not only based in Lahore and Bombay, but also the bulk of people associated with cinema in the shape of writers, directors, actors, and lyricists also hailed largely from Punjab. And what they brought out on cinema appealed largely to an audience that could personally as well as culturally identify itself with the milieu. This discussion specifically aims to investigate the role of visual media, particularly historical films, by critically analyzing the cinematic works on the Bengal partition directed by filmmakers from 3 generations. Understanding generational change, as Robert Burton notes, is vital for film scholars when analyzing historical films. These alternative archives, by forming popular memory, can help, if not eradicate, at least ameliorate historical amnesia surrounding partition in Bangladesh. Films on the Bengal partition have moved from being mimetic to the historical days during the partition, and these films manifest the division as a mistake done by policymakers. While the first-generation directors of the Bengal partition films depicted the consequences of the division in the lives of the displaced victims of the partition when their identities are at flux, the second generation of the Bengal partition filmmakers, accepting the division as an injury to the land and people, depicted the disruption of communal harmony questioned the necessity of the partition, and often showed a utopian possibility of reunion. The third generation of the partition filmmakers, not being witnessing the partition, deal with the concepts of nationalism, show more abstraction of the historical notion of the partition, and depend on other partition archives more than earlier directors. Somdatta Mondal argues that the political issues for most occasions is relegated to the margin, and instead pious nationalism versus interfaith love stories start gaining more visibility, which again help us to interpret the effect of the Bengal partition more in psychological and sentimental terms than in statistical truth. Gita Viswanathan and Salma Malik referring to Gananda Pandey's argument on film suggest using films or interpretation rather than even pursue sites of production of the meaning of partition. Nimai Ghosh's Chinnamul, based on the story by Swarnalekha Bhattacharya, is the first film to address the plight of refugees during the Bengal partition. In the film, depicting the physical pain and crisis of the time, Ghosh portrays the eve of Bengal's partition and the mass exodus of refugees from East Pakistan to India. The story of Chinnamul begins in Noldanga, a village in East Bengal, where Hindus and Muslims coexist harmoniously but live in abject poverty under the oppressive rule of landlords like Madhu Ganguly and Muzaffar Khan. The setting of the film shifts to Calcutta with the arrival of the group of the people to Shialda railway station. The title Chinnamul, a Bengal word meaning uprooted, captures the refugees' agony as they lose their homeland and become Bastuhara, landless people. The film highlights the devastating consequences of the political division of the Hindu migrants from East Bengal. Gagri Chakraborty notes that despite being commercially unsuccessful, Chinnamul established a new trend in social realism. Ritik Ghatak, a keen observer of Bengali society, explored the aftermath of the Bengal partition in many of his films. He employed a combination of realistic and symbolic imagery in his frames. Ghatak's partition trilogy have served as the most important archives of 1947 partition, 1947 partition in Bengal till date. Highlighting Ghatak's thematic and stylistic excellence in the trilogy, Diamond Oberoi Bahai in Ritik Ghatak and the cinema of Praxis comments that it is in these films that his basic political line of thinking, as it was developing in his theatre, got well formulated. He developed his thinking around the refugee, formulating it amidst states of amnesia and homelessness, and developed a style that was experimental. The first film of Ghatak's partition trilogy, Meghi Dhaka Tara, The Cloud-Capped Star, metaphorically shows the living condition of the uprooted East Bengalis leading the life of refugees in West Bengal. Tanvir Mokammal, a second-generation film director from Bangladesh, adopted the role of an oral historian in his documentaries. His first feature film on the Bengal partition is Chitra Nodi Pare, which explored the themes of loss, particularly the departure of the culturally vibrant Hindu population from East Bengal. The film also portrays the impact of ethno-nationalism on village, socio-economic condition, and the psyche of its people. The film being set around 1965 gives us also the longitudinal effect of Bengal partition, as Lieutenant Sengupta mentioned. Tanvir Mokammal's documentary film Shimanto Rekha and Shapno Bhumi these are made in participatory mode by interviewing witness of historical events as well as the next generation of the affected. By narrating some parts through his voiceover and by showing some footage and graphs. The inclusion of oral histories in video documentaries help preserve unique moments in history. This can help overcome the shortcoming of oral history, which often tends to record interviews in the audio mode and then transcribe history, which, so according to John Hebb and Mark Stein, collecting these interviews on digital video not only enhances the oral histories themselves, but provides a human and often emotional foundation on which to build a video documentary. Mokamel, famous for making films about the unspeakable, underprivileged, and marginalized sides of society, took the risk of making the documentary film Shopnabhumi, or The Promised Land, on the lives of the Biharis or stranded Pakistanis in Bangladesh. The film can be critically read as a contribution to trauma and memory studies that offer a unique different perspective on the lives and roles of stranded Pakistanis during and after the liberation war of Bangladesh. The issue of the stranded Pakistanis remained as one of the very sensitive identity formation issues. It can be seen as a metaphor for identity influx. During the partition, around 1 million Muslims from Bihar migrated to East Pakistan. Mukammal interviews camp inhabitants of Geneva camp in Mohammadpur, Mirpur, Shamtahar, Dinashpur, Syedpur, Chattogram, and Bangladeshis who were victims of collaborators as well as repatriated Biharis in Pakistan. The living conditions and lives of the stranded Pakistanis as captured in Shopnabhumi resonate with Agamben's concept of homo sacer, a living entity or human being stripped of individual life, living under a state of exception in which the rule of law is suspended. The documentary insinuates a link with cultural syncretism as a solution to the crisis. Mukammal asks the Biharis living in Bangladesh questions such as, how is it to live in the camp? Do you want to go back to Pakistan? How do your Bangladeshi classmates treat you? The responses vary depending on the age and experiences of the respondents. The members of the new generation of the Biharis living in Geneva camp are against the idea of going back to Pakistan. Mukammal highlights the ongoing arguments with camp households, particularly the conflicting views between older and younger generations on issues such as suffering, repatriation, and nationality. Most of the new generation born in Bangladesh wish to be considered Bangladeshis and blame West Pakistan for their plight. They believe that education and proper knowledge can emancipate them from the ghettoist lives. Mukammal also notes that several cross-cultural marriages between Biharis and Bangladeshis have taken place in these camps by now. Sadi Muhammad, a Bengali victim from Bihari aggression in 1971, talks in his interview about the violence his family has encountered. After March 25, 1971, they did not leave their building. Many slum dwellers took shelter in their 4-story building. He says that Pakistani soldiers had supplied ammunition to non-Bengalis. He and his siblings had smelled smoke as the army torched their building. His second documentary film, Shimantu Rekha, is a 2.5 hour 2017 film, Shimantu Rekha or the Borderland, interviewing the novelists, poets, singers, educationists, and ordinary people who eyewitness partition. Mukammal strives to find the answer who benefited from the partition and who lost, and tries to analyze the human cost involved. As a result, the film highlights issues associated with these refugee issues. So here on the slide, you can see the statistics of refugees from East Bengal to West Bengal. And he addresses these issues of Bengal partition such as nostalgia and memory, and underscores the influence of the partition on Bengal literature. Using statistical data on refugees, he analyzes the use of the new word refugee in Bengali socio-political life after partition and presenting the stories of those who are living with the consequences of history. The director depicts his work as quote-unquote a journey film, a journey to Petropol railway station, Cooper's camp in Ranaghar, Dubulia camp in Krishnanagar, in the Vadraki camp in West Bengal, where refugees from East Bengal took shelter, Dandakaranya in Madhya Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh, where refugees from East Bengal were sent, as well as Nainital in Uttarakhand and the Andamans, where some refugees from East Bengal were resettled. From the vastness of dealing with the topic, you can say that why is it a mega documentary? From the third generation, I would like to focus on the duology of Kaushik Ganguly's Bisorjon and Bijoya. By the setting of two Bengals separated by the riverine border Ichamati and by the storyline of illegal border crossing and interreligious love story, have shown the legacy of ethno-nationalism resulting from the hasty cartographic maneuver in 1947. The characters of these films live in the border areas of Bangladesh and India and communicate in Bangla with some dialectical variations. Studying these films as part of border studies, readers and audiences of these two films can retrospect the distinctive legacy of the bifurcation of Bengal that had this long-term effect on the people of the two Bengals and is very much present in the lives of the people of East Bengal and West Bengal, especially among the inhabitants of the border area. While touching upon border killing, illegal border crossing, the director Ganguly focuses on the sacrifice of the characters for the sake of love. Ganguly has used different flashback techniques, music, various editing techniques that have made the medium more appropriate to synchronize the past with the present. Srijit Mukherjee, unlike the first and the second generation directors of the Partition films, relied more on the Partition archives, especially on the fiction of Sadat Hasan Manto, Bisma Chawati, and Urvashi Bhutaria in his film Rajkahini. Rajkahini adds a new outlook to the existing Bengal Partition films, mostly melodramatic and based on the migration and displacement of middle-class Bengalis. Rajkahini depicting the tumultuous living condition of the sex workers living during the partition of 1947 in the Koti or mansion situated at the intersection of the Redcliffe line helps us look at the human dimension of partition history that retrospects the sacrifices of the mass number of voluntary death embraced by the women of Tuak Khalsa as documented in The Other Side of Silence. And by depicting so, he shows a metaphorical shift of the land from a motherland to the fatherly state that will be governed by rules and policies. By reinterpreting the reenactment, quote-unquote, Paul Ricoeur, of the Bengal partition history and relearning its human history, we can apply Talal Asad's insight that, quote, the past is a legitimate object of critique from the standpoint of the present, just as the present is an object of critique from the standpoint of the past. In this way, we can interpret and reinterpret present-day turbulences that neo-colonial nation-states face, such as ethnic violence, religious intolerance, and border tensions. Ricoeur insightfully writes, reenacting does not consist in reliving, but in rethinking, and rethinking already contains the critical moment that forces us to take the detour by way of the historical imagination. And Viet Thanh Nguyen refers to Derek Walcott's poem verse that he writes, either I'm nobody or I'm a nation. And he takes resort to a better verse that he finds in this poem. And he says that I had no nation now but the imagination. And Viet Thanh Nguyen welcomes everyone to expand their imagination, and rather than confining each one in the concept of the binary of us and they of nation, he welcomes and invites everyone to consider each as a citizen of the world. In that way, maybe the liminality can be overcome and people can be more into welcoming this just memory and just forgetfulness and forgetting. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Nidhi and Joy.
Okay. Nidhi, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. So we had our first presentation. We would want to now go to you, and if you are ready, then maybe we'll ask you to present your paper. Are you ready with your presentation?
Yeah, sure.
Do you have a PPT? Do you have any PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah, I have my PowerPoint, so can I share my screen?
Okay. So here maybe you have to.
But also,
You can share your screen. You have already the permission. You're allowed to share your screen.
Yeah. Can you turn on the camera, because this is like a virtual session and we want to actually have as much as possible interactivity. Yes.
I cannot actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Then what will happen with the PowerPoint?
So, do you want to share your PowerPoint? Otherwise, you can
Yes.
email. Okay, you can share. Otherwise, you can email us and we will share instead. Okay.
I'll share. I'll try sharing it. If this not works, I'll just mail you.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, so now we will hear from Nidhi, who is joining us from Indian Institute of Technology, Bhilai, and her paper is titled Pakistani Tola and Hindu Refugees, Language, Place and Identity in Juloos. So yeah, it's over to you, Nidhi. Yeah, at the end.
Is my screen visible?
yes.
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 Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Nidhi. I'm a doctoral scholar in Indian Institute of Technology, Bhilai, and I'll be presenting today my paper, which is titled Pakistani Tola and Hindi Refugees, where I'll be examining language, place, and identity in Juloos by Phanishwar Nath Renu. Phanishwar, I will just briefly introduce him. Phanishwar Nath Renu was born in a village in Forbesganj in Aranya, Bihar, and is regarded as one of a kind writer who developed his own style of language, heavily absorbing the colloquial tongue of his region. Some of his famous novels are Mela, Chal, Parti, Parikatha, Juloos, and many more. Yeah, so Juloos was published in 1966, and the setting is in Purnia. The setting is of two villages. One is named Nabinagar, which is a new village which has been rehabilitated to accommodate refugees, Hindu refugees coming from East Pakistan, and the other village is of the natives, which is the Godiya village. So the partition of India in 1947 has been extensively examined through literary and historical narratives, primarily focusing on Punjab and the displacement of refugees from West Pakistan. However, Phanishwar Nath Renu's Juloos presents a significant departure from the dominant frameworks by centering the experiences of Hindu refugees from East Pakistan and their resettlement in Bihar. Rather than foregrounding overt communal violence, Juloos illustrates a more insidious structural form of exclusion, otherization rooted in linguistic, cultural, and socio-economic hierarchies. Despite sharing a religious identity with their hosts, these refugees encounter systemic marginalization due to their regional and linguistic differences. This paper interrogates the themes of linguistic and cultural otherization, local resentment towards state-sponsored aid for refugees, and the mechanisms of inclusion and exclusion that structure post-partition Indian society. So, linguistic identity and otherization. One of the most striking aspects of Juloos in the manner in which Bengal Hindu refugees are labeled as Pakistanis by local Bihari Hindus despite their common religious affiliation. This process of otherization is deeply entrenched in linguistic identity. The refugee settlement is pejoratively named Pakistani Tola. Now, Tola in Bihari villages is a locality where either people of same caste or if they are of same caste of same religion live. So it reducing their existence to a geopolitical signifier rather than recognizing them as Indian citizens. This exemplifies Bourdieu's argument that linguistic capital is a primary determinant of social belonging. Those who do not linguistic norms are systematically marginalized. A crucial episode illustrating this linguistic exclusion occurs when Pavitra, a refugee woman, attempts to assert a shared cultural echo. So Panishurnath Renu presents it as such that after coming here, she realized what happens by adding Lal, Prasad, Jha or Narayan to people's names. Faces do not change, but there are many people in this village who do not agree with Pavitra's opinion and will say that impossible, Didi. Add title Thakur Prasad to any person's name of our village. You will see it will not fit. The face too shall match the name. Our country is our country, and someone else's will be someone else's. Pavitra says, we also used to cultivate paddy. People here also eat fish and rice. Everything is like our country. However, her claim is met with resistance, reinforcing the rigidity of regional identity as a basis for inclusion. This demarcation underscores the limitation of nationalist narratives that assume a monolithic Hindu identity by failing to account for linguistic and cultural divergences. Further, the suspicion toward refugees extends beyond language to caste and social status. Pavitra's assertion that appending a local surname would not alter one's identity is rejected outright. Now, economic resentment and local backlash. Beyond linguistic exclusion, Juloos expose the economic tensions that emerge as the refugees receive state assistance, provoking resentment among local communities. When a government official sanctions the construction of a school for the refugees, villagers express their discontent. They say the villagers have been shouting for schools for the last 10 years, but not even a single school has been opened. Look there, it has not even been 6 months since the Pakistanis have come and the order to open a middle school has been passed. The tension exemplifies Mamdani's theory of bifurcated citizenship, wherein post-colonial states differentiate between natives and settlers despite their shared legal status. The villagers perceive the refugees as receiving preferential treatment, overlooking the structural violence that necessitated their displacement. Local elite figures such as Talebar Buri further exacerbate this division by drawing comparisons between Bengali and Punjabi refugees, reinforcing a hierarchy of desirability. All the lazy people have become refugees, but Punjabi refugees are not like this. The internal stratification underscores the complexity of refugee integration, where economic resentment intersects with regional and cultural prejudices. Now, cultural stigma and accusation of pollution. A particularly insidious form of otherization in Juloos is the accusation that the refugees have been polluted during their displacement. The claim that everyone was fed beef by fleeing from Pakistan and whoever has tasted it at once will of course eat it again reflects deep-seated anxieties about purity and contamination. Mary Douglas argues in Purity Dangers about notions of pollution which function as mechanisms of social control, delineating who is deemed fit for inclusion. The accusation that the Bengali refugees might have been used to consume beef permanently marks them as outsiders, reinforcing their exclusion. Gopal Pine, a refugee, articulates the depth of this stigma. They call us Pakistani, this too can be helped. They call us Bengali, Kangali, this too can be helped. But this thing of accusing us of eating beef, how can this be helped? This moment encapsulates the dual burden faced by refugees. Their linguistic and regional differences already render them suspect, but the accusation of cultural impurity makes their marginalization even more entrenched. The discourse of pollution thus operates as a powerful tool for ensuring that regardless of their efforts, the refugees remain outside the bounds of local belonging. Now, attempts at integration and the limits of belonging. Despite facing exclusion, the refugees in Juloos actively seek integration. Pavitra advocates for intermarriage between Bengali refugees and local Biharis, suggesting that roti-beti ties would foster social cohesion. However, this proposal is met with skepticism. The villager questioned, but a Bengali is a Bengali. How can he be a Brahmin or Kayas? This response reveals the rigid caste and regional hierarchies that structure social belonging, demonstrating that national identity alone is insufficient for full inclusion. The establishment of the refugee school serves as another contested site of integration. While Pavitra insists, this school is not just for the people of the colony, but for everyone. Local resistance remains strong. In your school, all the Bengali behavior, dialect, language, and education will be taught. What will we do after getting that education? This opposition underscored the paradox of refugee assimilation. While the refugees seek inclusion, their cultural identity is perceived as a threat to the established social order. So, this novel offers a critical departure from conventional partition narratives by shifting the geographical focus to Bihar. It disrupts the notion of a unified Hindu identity, revealing how language and regional origin function as determinants of social belonging. The resentment toward government aid, the accusations of cultural pollution, and rigid maintenance of caste and regional distinctions highlight the profound challenges of post-partition integration. It compels us to reconsider the limits of post-colonial nationalism and the enduring marginalization of those displaced by historical upheavals. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for keeping within the time. And I would request you to stay because we will have our last presentation for this panel. After that, we will be having Q&A session. Nidhi, please stay.
Are you on mute? I cannot hear you.
Okay, sorry. I have to repeat myself. Nidhi, you need to stay with us. We have our last presentation for this panel, and then we will have a lot of questions maybe for you since you are joining us from far. Yeah. So thank you. Now we'll have our last presentation, and I really enjoyed reading Mowtushi's abstract, Tuning into History, Uncovering Partition through Radio Pakistan. I don't want to give my remarks on the abstract. I will have my questions, please. Yeah. And you can have 20 minutes since Nidhi has saved some time for us.
Thank you, Nidhi. So thank you so much for waiting. I'll begin as the slides take a few seconds to appear. So this is part of a much broader, bigger project that I'm currently looking at. I'm looking at radio and radio broadcasts and the role radio transmissions had in how we imagine partition and how we talk about partition. So that's my paper, Tuning into History, Uncovering Partition through Radio Pakistan. I look at three key ideas or three sort of questions that kind of govern at least this paper, which is part of a bigger sort of project. But for this paper at least, what I'm interested in is, how can radio broadcasts from the post-47 era tell us about how people experience the partition? What did they hear when they tuned onto the radio? Because they did. Hundreds of thousands of people did tune into the radio and they listened to the broadcaster announcing the partition and dismembering of the subcontinent. The second key concern is in what ways might the integration, and for me it is an integration, of radio archives with other textual, visual, and oral archives can enrich how we study partition. How the ways in which we should include radio history as part of South Asian history. The third concern is, I think, the bigger question that kind of guides the momentum of this and the objective of this conference is, how can these archives help promote conversations across present-day borders and discontents among the neighboring states in South Asia? How can radio archives help us to re-engage with the past and look at the past and not through the kind of raging political discontent that's around us, it's constantly around us. So on August 14, 1947, All India Radio Lahore broadcast its closing remarks, and we will listen to it if you like. I have extra 5 minutes. We'll listen to the actual broadcast. It'll take 20 seconds in a bit. So on August 14, 1947, All India Radio Lahore broadcast its closing remarks, which were followed by the Pakistan Broadcasting Service's jingle for the first time in history, and announcements in Urdu by Zahur Azar and Mustafa Ali Hamadi. The Bengali playwright Nazir Ahmed inaugurated the Pakistan Broadcasting Service in Dhaka, happening at the same time, followed by a Quranic recitation, and we had the folk singer Abbasidin sing two nationalist songs. The first one is in Bangla, as you can see in the slides, and the second one is in Urdu. So Abbasidin sang in real time these two songs, which he composed months before with his very good friend Ghulam Mustafa in Kolkata. He composed these songs months before Pakistan came into being, and listeners from the eastern part of Nepal could listen to Abbasidin sing these beautiful songs. I can't sing, so I'm not going to sing. We do have an in-house musician, Asifa, but I will not encroach this upon you. Let's just imagine very beautiful songs, right? Very, very, very beautiful tunes. The Dhaka station, after Abbasidin was on air, the Dhaka station then played a relay of Muhammad Iqbal's Tanam Nami. It's a very famous poem by Iqbal, which emphasizes the universality of the Ummah, and this was very timely because the Ummah, according to at least the Iqbalite vision, was in need for an Islamicized geography. And what better way to kind of play Iqbal at this very point when eastern and western wings of the country are trying to kind of imagine a unified nation state and nationhood on the eve of partition. An insignia, this is the next slide, was designed by the famed artist Abdur Rahman Chuttai to reinforce Radio Pakistan's commitment to Pan-Islam. Again, like the nationalist songs, this logo came into being. Actually, the plans for this were in effect before 47. They were already preparing for the partition, but this was finalized in 51. And I think it's an amazing, amazing insignia. As you can see, it bears three crucial markers of Pakistani identity. The first is, of course, the crescent moon and the five-pointed star, which actually has roots in Byzantine and Ottoman history. And then in the middle, you have verse 83 from Surah Al-Baqarah, which in English it states, "Speak true to the people," which was the motto of Radio Pakistan from 47 to at least 71, March 71. The second crucial marker of Pakistani-ness or identity here again, I hark back to Iqbal, is if you look at it from a distance and VR, it kind of looks like a bird in flight. The radio frequencies on both sides, and so this was here. Well, this was intentional because the idea was to associate this symbolic bird in flight with Iqbal's concept of the Shaheen, which is exemplified by the falcon. I think it's the national bird of Pakistanism today. The falcon, it is. And the third, which is wonderful, is you can see the evil eye at the bottom center, and this is wonderful because it kind of points, kind of suggests that Radio Pakistan had a sort of multi-sensory appeal, that it was like an all-seeing, all-hearing, all-knowing entity. And so this insignia is still used today by the Broadcasting Association in Pakistan. We don't use it anymore. We have a very boring insignia, which I'm not going to show. It's the red thing with like 10. You do, right? I mean, look at the art in there. We don't have this kind of finesse. But this was ours for a bit.
This is how they're very famous artists.
Very famous artists. We also have famous artists. What happened to them? Coming back to my paper then, so this was in place. The national anthem was also being composed by Hafiz Jalanpiri, and there were a wide range of programs being broadcast in Bangla and Urdu in the two big stations, Dhaka and Karachi, but there was also Lahore station. So Karachi station wasn't in, well, it took some time to build Karachi station, but the initial sort of declaration of independence came from the Lahore station. Lahore station also centralized Radio Pakistan's programming agenda, requiring all stations in the first few days of partition to broadcast nationalist songs in Urdu. And for regional stations like Dhaka, they could also broadcast national songs in Bangla. So Pakistan, as we know, was the concept of religious nationalism. The shared Islamic identity between the two wings was deemed sufficient to keep the country unified. As a result, a strong, centralized state was highly desirable. The first 5-year plan for 1952 to 1955, implemented by Pakistan's first Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan, included the expansion of the country's broadcasting network and the installation of a wireless telephone circuit to create an oral, but also oral, so your ears and your mouth. Oral and oral interactive linkage that would span the two, that kind of cover the 1,000 miles in the middle between the eastern and western wings of the new nation. The Ministry of Information and Technology recognized the importance of a national soundscape in post-colonial states and thereby assigned Radio Pakistan the mission of forging a strong on-air pan-Islamic national identity. This was consistent with the spread of politicized narratives that emphasized Pakistan's cultural and religious distinctness and political autonomy from India. I borrowed the concept or the term of soundscape from this very famous Canadian musician and writer called R.M. Sheffer, who defined the term as what he called a sonic environment, quote unquote, a sonic environment or a sonic landscape in the 1970s. So soundscapes for me are more than just sounds. They include situations, people, positions, and perspectives on dominant ideas at a given time and place. I also argue that sounds are tangible and visible in a cultural sense of the term, and so they are produced as a result of human struggle, human desires, and human emotions, and so they also affect our psychic, emotional, and intellectual being. And so I argue that, at least for this project, sounds are as tangible as textual sources of information, and sounds are wonderful ways in which we can understand and do partition studies. We know that in Islamic context, sound and technology are really important, especially when it comes to the call to prayer and sermon distribution, but I argue so are radio broadcasts. While this paper, this presentation, does not look into radio broadcasts within an Islamic context, I do explore how sound, mediated sound, auditizes, quote unquote, auditizes Muslim communities and establishes national identities, which is the main focus of the paper. The next slide. I want to say a few things about my sources of information. Between 2019 and 2024, I conducted a series of interviews, people who were in some ways or the other connected to Radio Pakistan, either as artists, writers, newsreaders, or producers. The most famous of the lot was Abdullah Farooq, who I met in Heidelberg last year, well, in 2023. Abdullah Farooq, together with Belal Muhammad and Shandip Chaudhary, founded Shadhin Bana Vedha. So apart from these interviews and oral narratives, I rely on radio journals, as you can see in front of you. Elan magazine was really famous. This was the mouthpiece in Bangla for the Broadcasting Association of Pakistan. I also rely on Betar Bangla. Again, what would these magazines publish, right? So not just radio programs, but really wonderful array of critical pieces, political commentaries about what was happening, the language debate, Urdu versus Bangla, so on and so forth, but also really amazing works of fiction, poems, short stories, prose poetry, but also paintings and sketches and photographs would get published in Elan and also Betar Bangla. These are my sources of information. I also rely on a range of audio archives. This project is part of an audio project. So the first is the Oral History Project, and I think this is based in Pakistan, and we can listen to a few minutes of that in a bit. The second is the British Library Endangered Manuscripts and Archives. You can listen to the Aga Khan speaking on the radio from this, from the links they have online. You can also listen to the speeches by Subhash Chandra Bose that were broadcast on the radio through All India Radio, through the British Library Endangered Manuscripts and Archives. The third is I rely on the archives that are, the in-house archives in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And there aren't many, but there are quite a few. And it's really interesting that Pakistan Broadcasting Association, they have a YouTube channel, and you can actually listen to some of the actual recordings from 47 through their YouTube channel. And I wonder if I can borrow a few seconds, not a few seconds, 20 seconds actually, and can listen to so it's 223 to 240. So we're going to listen to this person who made the announcement on midnight, August 14, Mustafa Ali Hamadani. And this video, the person who's talking in this video is his son. He talks about his father making this announcement and the kind of flurry and excitement and a lot of trepidation that went with the announcement. So can we have a listen?
Assalamu alaikum. Pakistan Broadcasting Service हम लाहौर से बोल रहे हैं। 13 और 14 अगस्त सन 47 ईस्वी की दरमियानी रात 12 बजे तुलुए सुबह आज़ादी।
I think it's fantastic. So you can listen. This is an actual. This is what hundreds of thousands of people would have listened, and we have to take into account communal listening as well. Not many people owned radio sets, but they would have listened to the same announcement. And I think it's really amazing that we can listen to these archives. There are many other programs that were recorded and are in these following sort of audio archives that anybody can listen to. So I'm a big fan of this sound historian called David Hendy, who's based out of University of Essex, and I follow his work a lot. And following David Hendy's work, at least for this project, I maintain that textual resources are a rich source of sonic data. We just don't rely. We can read between the lines and actually listen to what it might have sounded like back then. And so, in the numerous anecdotes. This is another book that I rely on. It's an amazing volume of 80+ memoirs, anecdotes, essays by radio personnel who worked for All India Radio, Radio Pakistan and Bangladesh Betar. So this covers like 80 years of radio history in Bangladesh and Kumar, which is here. So beautiful. So I maintain that I supplement my understanding of how sound functioned or the role that sound had or radio transmissions and recordings had in that period using audio archives but also textual archives, because like David Hendy, I argue that you can listen, you can imagine what it must have sounded like. We can imagine what those recordings, what those speeches, what those announcements must have sounded like, because we don't have a lot of recordings. Most of these were not preserved, or even if they were lost or destroyed. So sound is fleeting and difficult to pin down in ways that text is not, obviously. But so as a result, we can hear the past through written archives, and that's what I do in my project. I try to hear what the past must have sounded like through these written archives. So in this sense, written records serve as evidence of the original recorded sound, and I rely on eyewitness but also ear witness reports on Radio Pakistan from a variety of spoken, recorded and written sources for this investigation. Now I come to Radio Pakistan, right? So Radio Pakistan faced a huge challenge soon after 47 in creating a unified Pakistani identity. And this is the guy, he's a massive icon in the history of broadcasting in the world, Z.A. Bukhari. He was trained by the BBC people, especially Lionel Fielden and what's his name? Forget his name, the head of BBC in 1924. So he's the guy who led Radio Pakistan, and he was really important for the ways in which Urdu and Bangla broadcasts kind of played out the politicized drama around the linguistic debate. Barely 3 months into Pakistan's independence, a major disagreement arose regarding the national language. As we know, Muhammad Ali Jinnah initially envisioned national unity through diversity when he declared Urdu as the state language in Dhaka in 1948. Now we're going to go back. Sorry. The newly established Pakistani government, led by Liaquat Ali Khan, realized that radio would be the essential lifeline bridging the two annexes of Pakistan. So in a country with a large population that did not read or write, literacy was not a prerequisite for listening to the radio. You don't need to be literate to be able to listen to the radio. So it was essential that they also broadcast educational programs to bring the two groups together, the two sort of parts of the nation together. After the formation of Pakistan, debates over the national language surfaced with much vehemence. We have to remember that the majority of Pakistanis spoke hundreds of other languages and that Urdu speakers were a minority. The Pakistan Educational Conference proposed Urdu as the national language in 1947, but the members from East Bengal opposed it. The East Pakistan Constituent Assembly proposed Bangla to be the national language, since it was claimed, quite rightfully so, that the majority of the population, albeit in the East, spoke Bangla, 60%. Liaquat Ali Khan rejected this proposal, stating that Urdu, though spoken by a minority, fulfilled what he called a prophecy of a nation having a single language. I don't know what he means by a prophecy, though. I don't know what he means. Maybe you guys can tell me after I finish the paper. In March 1948, Jinnah arrives in Dhaka, and then he declares Urdu to be the official language, which had serious consequences for Pakistan both on and off air. It's the same year that the Ministry of Interior, Information and Broadcasting chose a very highly stylized, Persianized Urdu composition by a very famous musician, Hafiz Zalanviri, to become the national anthem of Pakistan. And this was met with a lot of vehemence, and people really criticized, even Urdu speakers, like the elite Urdu speakers from West Pakistan, criticized how ornately Persianized the diction was. And they said, even we need a dictionary, we need a Persian dictionary to understand our own national anthem. But the task of Radio, so Radio Pakistan was involved with creating the national anthem. The Radio Pakistan was also tasked with the job to broadcast the national anthem. And this was done very meticulously and regularly. So the Broadcasting Association was tasked with the pedagogical effort to make the new national anthem more widely known. The public's appreciation for the official anthem was thought to contribute to a sense of civic belonging. Ritualistic acts such as playing the anthem at school assemblies, political gatherings, national holidays, but especially on the radio, highlighted its status as a revered sound. So Radio Pakistan would broadcast national songs in both Urdu and Bangla, but every single program would end with the relay of the national anthem so that you would remember it and you would not forget. It's very ritualized listening practice. The Dhaka station, you might not be surprised to know this, was very proud of playing the Urdu national anthem alongside the Bangla nationalist songs by Abbasuddin. So many of these songs were written, as I said, by Abbasuddin before Pakistan came into being. But one of the well-loved and most liked Bangla nationalist song was by Nazir Ahmed, who's a very famous playwright during this time. It was called Pakistan Zindabad. And my mother and my father, they tell me that they would sing this song after they would sing Hafiz Zalanviri's very Persianized, unintelligible. Right. And my mother said she liked it. She was a young girl. She said, I liked it because I could understand the words. And my father sort of corroborated that. You also sang it, I imagine, right? So Pakistan Zindabad was as famous, as well-liked, if not more, than the Zalanviri's national anthem. And Dhaka station played both. Dhaka station played both and gave airtime, equal airtime to both. So after the initial transmission of Urdu nationalist songs, talks, and features on the idea of the Arz-e-Pak, the Dhaka station would broadcast Bangla radio programs. And one of the programs that, again, was highly criticized, was quite problematic for listeners, or at least Karachi, was programs on Tagore. So Tagore's ballads were much loved by listeners in Eastern Bengal, but as the supreme exponent of the Bengali language and culture, Tagore posed a significant challenge for Radio Pakistan. They did not like Tagore. The government felt very queasy about Tagore's impact on contemporary Bengali literature, portraying him as anti-Muslim, alleging that his writings are steeped in Hindu and imperialist ideas, and making them antipathetic to the idea of Pakistan. The Broadcasting Association in Karachi proposed that Tagore's songs be replaced on air with the contemporary ghazals by Nazrul and Ghalib. As a result, when Tagore's much-loved ballads were given less airtime, listeners in the East grew very angry. They would call the radio station and complain, and it got so bad that people from all over the eastern parts of Bengal traveled to the Nazimuddin Road station, which is in Puran Dhaka now, and they would actually confront the producers as to why they weren't able to listen to Tagore's songs. Some of them got even slapped and beaten up by listeners. It was that serious. Attempts to prohibit, and I'm not making it up, it's all here. It's all here, and you can see how many times I've read this. It's really amazing. Attempts to prohibit Dhaka station from playing Tagore made their way into parliamentary discussions in 1955 and 67. Ayub Khan's Minister of Information and Broadcasting, Khwaja Shahabuddin of the Dhaka Nawab family, claimed in the 67 Parliamentary Assembly that, and I quote him, only the works that Tagore wrote in East Bengal could be broadcast from Dhaka. The works that Tagore wrote from West Bengal cannot be broadcast from Dhaka. And he told the National Assembly, quote unquote, necessary steps would be taken to curtail the playing of Rabindra Sangeet in the future, unquote. So interesting. How would you know which works he played in East Bengal or West Bengal, right? I know, but then how do you do that? Attempts to ban Tagore from the airways of Bengal proved futile. So this had disastrous consequences. The next, I think a few years after that, or even before that, there was a centenary celebration, 67? So that was also, the government made many attempts to kind of ban celebrating that, and people even made it even louder and bigger. So the government was really, really embarrassed at this point. So they had a meeting in Karachi with this guy, Zaid Bukhari, and he said that actually you can play Tagore, but instead of 20 minutes, we'll give you 10 minutes. So there was a time limit to how many minutes you could hear Tagore on air. But did the Bengali radio producers adhere to this rule? Obviously not. Instead of 20 minutes, they played 22 minutes, and they would secretly slip in an extra song, which is very naughty. But I like it. I like it. I like how naughty radio personnel work. The other issue, and I'm not going to read. I think I'm coming to the time, is that radio programs that used words that were supposedly Hindu or sounded Hindu, like Ram, Gopi, Bhagavan, Shyam, could not be used on air. And this did not create quite a stir, but the fact that Tagore was banned on air created quite a stir. And what we see is that it's really interesting that even though the radio personnel in Dhaka loved Tagore, when Zaid Bukhari suggested that the Bangla that you hear on air be modernized and standardized, nobody from Eastern Bengal complained. The one person who did complain was that very famous linguist, Dr. Shahidullah. He was a regular at the radio. He would give talks almost every week on the radio. And he was one person who called it a mashkara. He said, what are you doing with the Bangla language? You're turning into a mashkara or a joke. So he was one of the very few intellectuals or people who objected to Bukhari's idea to or proposal to standardize and modernize Bengal. But the radio people who worked for Radio Pakistan, including Abdullah Farooq, who I interviewed a year ago, he said that we didn't have a problem with that, because if you standardize the Bangla on air, then you would gain more listeners. People from various walks of life, especially people in the rural outskirts, could understand radio programs better if they were transmitted in a much more, I don't know, in a sort of colloquial Bangla. So on the one hand, they did have a problem with the, in the East, there was a great deal of controversy surrounding playing or not playing of Tagore, but when it came to standardizing and modernizing Bangla, there was no complaints whatsoever. So what I also argue at the end of the paper and at the end of the project is that listeners in the East really enjoyed listening to Urdu programs as well. I show that we shouldn't pit Bangla against Urdu as the sort of narrative that governs these few years of the history of Eastern Bengal. At least for the radio personnel from West Pakistan and East Pakistan, there was a real attempt to bring Bangla and Urdu together as quote-unquote sister languages on air. So if I show you the next slide, so this is an advertisement from Elan, and this shows the timings, the Radio Pakistan program timetable for Bangla and Urdu lessons online. And almost every station from Karachi, Rawalpindi, Lahore, Hyderabad, Quetta would have Bangla lessons for their non-Bengali listeners. And the same in Chittagong and Dhaka as well. There will be timetables for Urdu lessons for non-Urdu speakers in this part of Bengal. And so I argue that Pakistan's airspace, at least the airspace, was home to both Bangla and Urdu to varying degrees as the two dominant national languages. And that we shouldn't think of this era as an era when Urdu and Bangla were like enemy languages or didn't sort of see eye to eye. I'm coming to the end. I'll just take 1 minute. I am at the very, very end of my paper. So Urdu and Bangla shared the airspace of Pakistan until at least the early months of '71, when Urdu would be re-emphasized as the bearer par excellence of Pakistani national identity, as Islam could no longer be the sole identifier of the Arzapak when East Pakistan broke away and later formed Bangladesh. To conclude, I will argue that Radio Pakistan did not pit Bangla against Urdu. Instead, the two major stations, Dhaka and Karachi, worked together to create linguistic programs that complemented one another and complemented the two wings of the nation. Despite debates in Eastern Bengal about modernizing Bangla, Bangla and Urdu shared an interactive sonic space on the air as sister languages. And Radio Pakistan attempted to create a national soundscape. To how successful it was is open to argument, but it did attempt to create a national soundscape which was neither predominantly Urdu or Bangla or Islamic. Up until '71, Pakistan's national soundscape was more democratic, I would say, than the country's overall political landscape. Thank you. I'll end there.
Okay, super. You have taken some more time,
Oh,
but that's a
sorry.
pleasure. Can we just go back to the view of our virtual audiences and the presenter so that, yes, and it would be great maybe to open the floor, but before that I would want maybe the people who have joined us virtually, if they want to ask the questions,
Stop sharing.
that would be our pleasure. But just to open it, that this particular panel that we just had, all the presentations are, all the papers have some way or other tried addressing the questions of visual and audio media, and this is certainly not like typically looking at visual as a medium or like simply maybe a subject of study, but also a tool to go back to the past and reinvestigating the history and partition particularly. And quite Nidhi has presented online, and when I was looking into even the cover of that book, Juloos, it is quite interesting that is also giving a visual sense that how the journey, how the movement of the people that represents the idea of 66, and you can still feel the movement of people, the mobility of people, and that's where all the struggles that she talks about, the refugees. This may be in the academic space that today when we try to look at history through the textual analysis, it enables a possibility with the visual and audio material that this panel has actually opened up a lot of possibilities for rethinking. And with that, I think I would want the people who are I can see many of them are here other than Nidhi. If you want to go first, I would be happy to open it for you, and then we have many people in the room. I believe they will have questions. The people who have joined us from via Zoom. Okay. Yes, please go ahead. Anirudh, you have gone.
Thank you, Mowtushi, for your wonderful presentation. It is really nice to listen this very less spoken soundscape of United Pakistan, or how was it during the partition era. And I have two questions. One is to our previous presenter. Her name is
Israt Jahan?
Israt Jahan, yes, exactly. That you are using the term amnesia, and in a sense, amnesia is a kind of medical condition, but we are using this term into a collective amnesia in that sense. So, but is it possible to use amnesia in a collective sense, although many scholars many also used it, but perhaps we can think about some other words, perhaps the oblivion or the non-remembering instead of amnesia, because how far amnesia could be, it's of course rhetorically possible, but to be a bit more critical about the word. What is your idea about that? And I have another question to our another presenter, Nidhi. Yeah, and you are using. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. So the thing is that you were. I mean, the time when you were taking, or the novel or this piece was written, it's just after the partition, or immediately after the partition, and you were talking about the story was talking about the social fabric of that time in that sense. So, but of course there are many stakeholders of that time. But I think in how you were analyzing the novel or the story, in that sense, the one important part of these stakeholders, the role of the government, how Indian government or the government dealt with this problem and how people reacted with this problem. That is one of the significant part of this social fabric. I think that is somehow missing in your in your discussion. So could you also bring this part? Thank you. Thank you so much.
If I go first?
Yes.
Thank you for your question. So I have used the term amnesia in the context of memory studies, where the terms like oblivion or dementia, it would be very limited to personal use. But if you put it in opposite to collective consciousness or collective unconscious, so here comes this amnesia. And if you cannot eradicate amnesia, but there are ways that these memory studies experts are suggesting. For example, there can be collected memory. While there is the absence of collective memory, you can go for this collected memory. And I try to show that how this popular media can help you develop a popular memory that can somehow ameliorate your amnesia that has the collective absence of this memory. This is what I want to point is that this is a deliberate forgetfulness, and which is unjust forgetfulness. So if it is addressed and then you decide that this part should be remembered and this is from where we should move on, then it is just memory. I hope I could answer.
Thank you.
Nidhi, would you like to respond?
Actually, I would like you to clarify a bit. What exactly do you want me to explain?
Would you like to repeat your question for Nidhi?
I'm sorry, I didn't. I understood you asked. Yeah.
I mean, I did not.
Okay, as far as I am.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so as far as I understood, you were asking that I should talk more about how the government was aiding the refugees and what was the natives' reaction to it. So it's like in most of...
I'm sorry, I did not say something like this. I was saying about the time when you were talking, I mean, the story or the narrative goes, there was many stakeholders at that moment. I think one of the largest or one of the powerful stakeholders was the government, how the Indian government or that and the local government deal with this issue. And then people reacted to this issue. I think that the story also, this part of the story probably not spoken, but it is present there. This is how the people reacted to the government policy or the refugee rehabilitation program in that sense. But although in the story the government's position is absent, but this is how the people reacted also in the social fabric of that time. So it's not a question, it's not an explanation, it's just a point probably you can bring up also in discussion. That is my question. It's not a question.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, fine. So maybe people from this room who is open to all of you, we have still 5 minutes, but we can I think take 10 minutes because
we started.
All right.
Yes,
Hi,
please.
thank you so much for your presentation. That was really, really interesting.
And is she audible?
Yeah, they can.
You can sit there if you like.
Thank you so much for your presentation. That was extremely interesting. So yesterday we heard about possibly using emotion as a way to study the partition, and I thought that was really fantastic as well. And I was wondering if this could be applied to radio broadcasting in any way. So I understand that it would be difficult because probably a lot of people that heard that first broadcasting have probably passed. But do you think that's possible in anything?
So emotion is really important. Thank you. Emotion is really important in the study as well, or the affective contents of radio programs, because in Elan, for example, and in the other radio journals, the listeners would write to the program producers and they would explain how they felt when they listened to a particular program. So a great deal of emotion. Even if if they have complaints, they would write, but also people writing, telling them about how this reminded them of their home back in Bihar, for example, or or how this particular song or tune was sung to them by their mother. So gradient from motion is definitely there. So I'm really glad you bring this out, and I couldn't say it in this, couldn't mention it in this presentation, is that during so after 47, the Ministry of Information would send scouts across East and West Pakistan. It was called the Listeners Research Group. They would go around the rural parts, especially the rural outskirts of East and Western Pakistan, talking to people about, first of all, whether they own their radio sets and why they don't have radio sets. It was quite pricey at that time. And the people who did own radio sets, this group would interview them, would speak to them about what kind of programs they wanted to listen to and why. So a great deal of affective sort of components were part of this research. People did speak about what kind of programs they would want to listen to because it made them feel a certain way.
Are these archived anywhere? Is there access to these things?
So in Elan, you can read about this in Elan. Also, the Dawn in the newspaper, there was a column there. You can read Dawn newspaper at the National Archives. And on the, I can't remember the page number, but like page 6 or 7, there was a column. It was called Voices of the Listeners, and they would write these comments, very beautiful ones, but also sometimes very angry ones, like the ones who don't like listening to, for example, a certain program. But you know, so interesting, we didn't publish it. Nobody complained about Bangla or Urdu, the choice of language. And I'm just wondering, maybe it's not as neat as we think it is. Maybe there were some letters from people complaining about why a great deal of programs were in Urdu, for example, but those were not published. But what I would like to highlight is that there was a lot of emotional content in these letters. And so yeah, there are textual archives actually, textual archives of this. Not a lot, but what we have, we can start working on those. I am working on those.
Thank you.
The good news is that Mowtushi is actually involved in a research project in the university by which he is digitizing data.
Right, I am trying to digitize data.
And it will be available in the BRAC University
through the library database and Bangladesh Bihar database. Fingers crossed. I have the money, I don't know how to spend it.
Never say that.
It's a lot of money, I don't know how to spend it.
No more questions? Yes, please.
I was just wondering, you say that the airtime was fairly equally
Restricted?
divided between Bangla and Urdu?
Not in Dhaka, not all the time. But what I argue is that people liked listening to Urdu programs from the eastern part of the nation.
East Pakistan station, right?
I'm looking at both East and West Pakistani stations, Karachi and Dhaka, but for this paper I highlighted Dhaka.
So for the West Pakistan station also people were to hear Bangla?
Yes, Abbasuddin was a huge hit. Abbasuddin was a huge star. They would invite him to stations in Rawalpindi, Lahore and Karachi to sing Bangla songs, not Urdu. They loved Abbasuddin songs and a whole host of other musicians whose stories are here. I forget their names. Bangla, Polli Giti, Bhatiyali songs were loved by West Pakistani listener groups. And so we can't say 50-50 distribution of the airtime between Bangla and Urdu, but I would say Bangla had a representation, like a sonic representation in the airspace of West Pakistan, as did Urdu in the airspace of East Pakistan. Yes.
Hi, thank you for these really great papers. Hi, thank you for Mowtushi, so nice to see paper. I have a question for Nidhi and then for Mowtushi. With Nidhi's paper, I was just wondering, lurking in what you're presenting as these kind of regional, ethnic, linguistic differences, there seems to also very much be, like with this emphasis on like purity and impurity, a question of cost. And that seemed to not really be appearing in your paper very much. And I think what you were emphasizing about Renu's novel was his use of vernacular language. So I was just curious if there's a way in which these questions of costism are surfacing in certain ways and how Renu is also using language, because he's obviously also using a vernacular that has a very different non-Brahmanical heritage as well. So if you could just speak a bit about that. And then Mowtushi, I was really, I understand that you're having to rely a lot on textual sources as well for this project, but that 20-second recording that you played for us,
Yeah.
I mean, it was so striking to have that echo sound. It says, Right. And so I'm just curious where, like, what the kind of broadcast infrastructure was, whether, because I'm thinking, like, with Abdasuddin and, like, folk songs or even Patiali song, there's a way in which, like, there's an attenuation of melody, like, whether these were factors that were also coming into how they were preparing the radio infrastructure itself. I mean, so much of the orality literature has also been about the signal-noise relation. And I'm just thinking that, just even like where, for example, I'm thinking like, for example, like when Fanon writes about Radio Algérie and like how people are basically using where moments of frequency are being disrupted so that the rebels can transmit messages as well. So I'm just curious where I love like how you're presenting democracy here as a kind of negotiated soundscape that people like they're not just playing Tagore because it's been allowed, but because people have gone and protested it. So I'm just curious where that like physical infrastructure, what it means to actually broadcast a particular sound as well.
Should we wait for Nidhi?
Nidhi, could you hear the question?
I could not actually get it.
Okay, maybe then.
You come forward enough.
I guess I can just scream into the computer. Nidhi, I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about like vernacular language and casteism, because a lot of the examples you were offering about kind of ethnic linguistic difference seemed very much to be about questions of caste regulation as well. So I was just curious where if one of the interventions Raina was making is also was this use of vernacular language, especially like Bihari languages, where whether he's in some ways kind of circumventing these questions of caste as well.
I will try to answer this. I'm not able to comprehend your question, sorry. But yes, there was questions of caste. I mean, even for the natives, there is a system of hierarchy which is being maintained by the people of the village. And even in that scenario, the person who is of an upper caste, who was an upper class position in the village, and his views are being given preferences over whatever goes on with the refugees. For example, there's an instance when the proposal for the refugee school is being passed, one of the upper caste people in the village, who was Taliban Puri, he was very infatuated with Pavitra, the refugee women. So even though the villagers were against any mingling with the refugees who had come, he suggested that we hold a feast for this win of theirs, that where the Hindus and the Bihari Hindus and the Bengali Hindus we mingle and we share a meal, and they will cook a meal for us. So even though they are reluctant initially to kind of do any mingling, but since a person of a high class caste orders this, the people of the lower in the hierarchy also follow it. So of course there is this caste dynamic operating in the natives as well. I guess it answers, if it answers.
Let's move to.
Thank you.
If I understand your question about physical infrastructure and how that sort of had a really important sort of role to play in how sound was disseminated, the physical infrastructure wasn't always reliable. One of the things, so I'll use Abbasidin as an example, was that because he composed many of these songs in Calcutta before 47 took place, and these were recorded by the Gramophone Record Company, they had a lot of problem bringing this back to Calcutta, and so special permissions and stuff and permits would have to be assigned by the government of India, for example, to allow these gramophone records to kind of cross the border and come to Dhaka so that they can be playing online. And so Abbasidin was very, well, they didn't have much of a choice. What he did was that he said, I don't need those records, I can sing those songs again and again and again. So same thing with the 71 materials, the Shadin Bangla Betar Kendra materials. The station was in an undisclosed location in Calcutta. And I know from Abdul Al-Faruq, who I interviewed, as I said, a year ago, he said that all the radio recordings from 71 are still there somewhere in the archives of the Indian National Broadcasting Association. We just haven't made the effort to bring this back. So in terms of, and now we can't, because even we can't. Well, this is for another project. I think we need more money to get this back. So it's really interesting. So sound could travel to places, but the actual records or recordings that had records of the sounds could not. And so people would perform on air.
So this is also interesting.
Which is
wonderful
as well, right? And artists would move frequently between stations in Karachi, Lahore, and Dhaka to perform in Bangla and Urdu for the listener groups in West and East Pakistan, because they couldn't rely on the records. Which I think also gave more sort of meaning, emotional meaning probably, because these were sung live as well. So I do rely on some records, the ones that I know have been archived, but they're not too many. So what I do is that I supplement what I don't have in audio archives with memoirs and anecdotes of how they felt when they sang something, for example, like how Abbasidin felt when he sang for his West Pakistani fans. He'd be mobbed outside of the station.
And to know he's there.
And to know he's there, that's right, yeah. Does that answer in some
Oh no,
way?
this is so exciting.
But could you listen to Radio Karachi from Dhaka?
Yes, you could listen to Radio Moscow from Dhaka.
But Karachi was.
Yes, you could also listen to all the Indian radio stations, which of course the government didn't like, because you can't control radio transmissions. The border might be here from here, but you can't control air.
Yeah.
So radio frequencies would travel, and I think the way we study radio frequencies, we should look at how radio frequencies and transmissions made and unmade the border, and still does to this day.
That's what I think has happened even post-partition. Like Radio Ceylon was broadcasting a lot of things which Indians were listening, like Sayani Brothers. And Sayani Brothers were not being allowed to sing or do a program in India, like All India Radio. That's how the cross-border thing was happening with them.
Very good. I'm really glad you mentioned Radio Ceylon. So there were two programs by Radio Ceylon, Binaka Geetimala and Lipton Ke Sitare. And Professor Fokrul Alam of Dhaka University tells me they would listen to those Bollywood songs of Elvis and Beatles over and over again, because the government in Pakistan banned the transmission of these songs. We also listened to Lipton Ke Sitare.
Instead of doing homework.
Instead of doing homework. That's right.
Okay, so questions?
I just want
You had a question.
Yeah,
Sorry,
please,
it's fine.
No,
after you.
I have two questions basically. One is for everyone, I think every researcher is doing it, and another one for Mowtushi. It was a very interesting one, your paper. So is there any certain meaning to the word elan? Like, does it mean something? Because it seems like it's something I don't know of. It's very unheard of.
And the equivalent of that in West Pakistan was awaz, which means sound. They would draw, yeah. So,
And in the etymology, there's also a sense of a waiting.
yeah, that's right.
I have another question that is, I only started recently, started reading all the literary pieces on partition literature and whatnot, and I've already seen movies about partition, but I am a very young person, so I haven't really faced it. Like, it didn't affect me directly or any of my family members, so I don't know how to feel emotional about those partition events, because I haven't faced it directly. So how do you researchers feel when you are reading those or watching those movies? Do you take them as facts or relate to them emotionally?
It's really wonderful.
Or how do you approach them? Because I do see movies of partition and I feel sad about those events, but I cannot really relate to their emotions, like exactly how they felt. Because you cannot really feel that if it does not affect you directly through your family members or maybe yourself. So,
It's a huge drawback as a researcher. Yeah, you should.
Can you also
can I add something?
Yeah, please.
I can.
So what she said, I think we talked about this yesterday as well when Adibaku mentioned like the generational experiences of partition. And what Suhaina said, I also don't feel personally attached to it, but my grandmother, she had family members living across the borders. My grandparents' house are like 10 minutes walk away from the Bangladesh-India border in Feni. So that was like, I feel like it made me more connected to the whole partition aspects of it, all the emotions around it. But I also think that this can be used as a source of distance between generations as well, right? Because as we saw in Man's presentation, that we have people who live in the Geneva camps, there is a generational difference in opinions. Like one generation thinks they're from Bihar, but the other generation thinks they're from Bangladesh or Bengali. So that's I just wanted to add to that in a sense.
So if I answer that, you ask that how much fact is there. So as Harold Pinter says, truth in drama is always elusive. So you can substitute drama with any of the art pieces. So it is always elusive, but we don't stop the search for truth, right? And this gives a liberty to literature or art, that it can include many things in it. And about the affective part, if you say that if a film did not move you, I would request you to watch one of the documentaries, either Srimantareka or Shapnabhumi. I hope that it will move you, because when you see the plight, see, in 1947, everyone who exists during the time of conflict is a part of that history. You don't have to have weapons in your hand to be the fighter. You are part of history. So just take the examples of these Biharis. They also fought for 1947, for independence. With the hope, they came to East Pakistan. If you read Azmat Ashraf's Refugee 2, you will see it is his memoir. You will see the pangs and agonies. They came as they were very young. They could adapt to the language well. They learned this language, and this was their primary education language. They learned it, and then towards 1971, because of their support towards the West Pakistan's electorate and many other issues, a number of them supported them, but a mass number of them faced ethnic cleansing. And now, what will they do with the language that they have learned? They have to think of now another homeland. Constantly they were on the go, but what were their mistakes, right? So they saw the same dream. I am also not directly affected by partition in any way, just because I'm old, don't think that I was also affected. I was also not affected. None of my previous generation was, but when I started reading, it really moved me. And if you also watch Ice Candy Man, Praxis it was, there too you will see that, I mean, this is very psychological portrayal in the Bangla partition, because Punjab faced large-scale massacre, while Bengal was spared of large-scale massacre. In 1947, there was this direct action day when they suffered and after the riots. Otherwise, the Bengal partition is looked at more as the separation of these two Bengals, the psychological separation. I mean, when I'm sure that we will be a little more into it, you will start feeling it. I'm hopeful.
Can we do it over the tea?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I also wanted to ask a lot of questions, but I thought we'll do it over the tea.
Yeah.
And I think just to conclude that, certainly congratulations to all three presenters, including Nidhi there. It actually takes us to finally, maybe we have more sessions, and of course all of you are invited to the whole day other events, and this discussion will carry on actually. But taking from the last question that, how it moves us, that takes a lot of responsibility as well of the modern day media and the mediation that is happening. And today's all the presentations are somewhere or other connecting to this visual representation and how it fits in the idea of memory, borderland, because modern day media representation somehow actually dilutes this idea of partition and try to create much more of a statist representation of the our feelings of nationalism or maybe cross-border understanding of human. So from there, I think we will take it forward, the discussion, and wonderful presentation for all three presenters. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
tea, right? We'll go.
Yes, we'll wait for tea, and I think we have just 10 minutes.
Okay,
We have to
start.
come back at 11.